Thanks for being here, whether it's an afternoon thing for you or a cocktail lecture hour. But again, I'd like to welcome you to the North Carolina Museum of Art virtually. I am Amanda Maples, the curator of African art at the NCMA, and I know that there are a lot of friends and colleagues out there, so thank you so much for being here again. And also welcome to those of you who are new to the NCMA, whether in person or virtually. We're just very happy to welcome you today or tonight. So this was originally scheduled to be part of a live event that is part of my exhibition currently on view called Good as Gold, Fashioning Senegalese Women. But as these things happen with COVID, we've had to pivot. And I think this actually makes for an even more exciting event with possibilities for hopefully an even more broader audience. So hopefully we'll welcome a nice global community. We've also developed a very robust virtual experience of the exhibition that I wanted to tell you about, which also includes a short video about Lina's installation that contributes to the Good as Gold exhibition. And I wanted to note that it will remain on view until April 2021, so past the closing of the exhibition. And it is upstairs in the African galleries as a sort of connected yet separate entity. I really wanted to give it the space to breathe in the African galleries and also make it publicly available. So it's free for you to see Lina's installation because it is a floor above Good as Gold. So I really wanted that. I wanted the power of her amazing work to be available for our community for free. So you can find it there until April. I also want to note we do have a YouTube channel. So if you want to see the video playlist or the YouTube or the virtual tours, you can go to our YouTube channel. And you can also subscribe to these virtual exhibitions at our website, ncartmuseum.org. So as you know, today we have the absolute pleasure of welcoming one of my all-time favorite artists, Lina Iris Viktor. Thank you so much for being here. As you might have read on the screen, she's a Liberian-British conceptual artist, painter, and performance artist living and working itinerantly between New York and London. So she's quite mobile, and this is something I hope we get to talk about today. She takes a multidisciplinary approach to her work, weaving disparate materials and methods belonging both to contemporary as well as ancient art forms, which makes it very fitting, I think, in the African galleries. And she uses this in order to call into question the very nature of time and being. So most importantly, for the Good as Gold exhibition, she uses the practice of water gilding with 24 karat gold to embed her canvases with layers of light that provoke philosophical commentary on dualities and on the socio-political and historical preconceptions surrounding Blackness and its implications, which is definitely something that we're going to get into today. I'm excited to hear more about that. So Lina's here with us again because she created a site-specific installation, which is on view at the NCMA as part of Good as Gold. And it features 3 pieces from her Constellation series that she's calling Triumvirate. So it is, again, site-specific, and it features this gorgeous black on black paint that shines and reflects light. So no matter where you stand, you get a different version of the installation. And I think that's really something I want to dig into, is that you have to change your positionality, and no matter where you're standing, you get a different experience of this work. And it also makes it very focused on the site. And then finally, I wanted to note that artists reveal the world to us, and that revelation becomes that much more poignant and relevant when articulated during such a trying and tumultuous time as our country and our world is currently experiencing. So we need art now more than ever. And this is something that Lina and I were talking about in preparation for today. So I definitely want to talk about it a bit more together. And, you know, art is necessary. It reveals the world to us. So it helps us better see ourselves, but also our positionality, as I just mentioned. And hopefully we can find better ways to be responsible global citizens together. So anyway, I'm sure we'll talk more about that, about the protests, the impacts of COVID. Without further ado, however, I want to introduce and welcome Lina Iris Viktor. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm sure it'll be a lively and engaging conversation.
I'm sure. Thank you so much, Amanda and Maria and the North Carolina Museum of Art for having me. And very much looking forward to discussing the installation with you.
Excellent. So I wanted to kind of start off with that idea of value. So there's a few questions I have surrounding that, and I really wanted to show our community some video of that installation that you did, again, called Triumvirate, and that black and gold, and think about the signature colors, black and gold. And you can maybe tell us a bit more about this installation and how you went through creating it and how the idea of value might be part of it. So I'm going to share my screen and we can talk over this, or you can talk over this.
Yeah, so as you know, I mean, I've always used a very restrictive palette with my work. In the beginning, in around 2013, 2014, I used Majorelle blue, black, white, and gold. And around 2015, I was kind of investigating what would happen if I even diminished that spectrum even further, and literally just use the value black and the metal gold in my work, and whether I could even successfully create work that was engaging with just these two, I guess, I guess opposites. And you touched on the idea of value. For me, when I work with the color spectrum, because I have obviously deviated out of this color spectrum before, but when I address it, I think of it as white and black being the parents of the color spectrum, and they exist on the two furthest edges, the extremes of the spectrum, and obviously all the other colors fall within. And they to me are not actually colors; they are values. They are it's kind of superior to or above color. And then also, I use gold, which is a metal, and I do water gilding, 24 karat water gilding, as you know, with 24 karat gold. And for this installation, it kind of is a conversation I've been having for, I would say, the last 5 years, that has been fine-tuned and tweaked, throughout that period of time. And I just finished an exhibition in London where I had an installation, which was just with one of the works that is currently showing at North Carolina, which is Constellations 9. And I created this full installation on the first floor of these black on black walls, because I really wanted to extrude and have a lot of the flora and the Dark Continent series works kind of be extruded from the actual works and into the space, because I'm very much about creating immersive environments and kind of creating a more immersive experience for the viewer. So that was the impetus with that show, and I wanted to continue that conversation on the Triumvirate. And we had the 3 works which have never been shown before in this way. It's the Constellations 4 has never been shown before, and Constellations 9 was just shown in London. The first work, Constellations 1, which is the only figurative work in the series, has shown a lot, but that was one of the first works I made. And so to have these 3 works come together, Triumvirate comes from the ancient Roman idea of 3 men being in power, in positions of power, and the kind of hierarchy of these 3 men that would basically govern over the mass. And so I was thinking, well, there's obviously no men in my work, and even though it's only one figurative, it almost stands in that kind of positionality in the show as well. This idea of power and prowess. Hence why the figurative work is kind of suspended slightly above. That was also something I borrowed from the Rothko Chapel, because I'm a very big fan of Mark Rothko. And if you go to the Rothko Chapel in Texas, he also has a similar orientation and hanging of his works, where one of the works is slightly raised above the others, and I was always very inspired by that. So that's kind of what I was borrowing from when I had that particular ordering and positionality of the work.
Yeah, I wanted to pull up that image that you sent me of that installation that you did that was prior to this one, so our audience could see that, since you're speaking about it. And I know we'd hoped to create that screen and that more immersive experience, but I think due to the space and the way it's used, that it unfortunately couldn't make it happen. But I still think that you've created this amazing experience already, just again with the positionality that no matter where you move in that room, you get a different experience. And I do love that you've centered the feminine perspective, this like queen of the wall there in the very middle, and that to me makes a very powerful statement. Very much.
I mean, onto what you're saying about the way that the eye plays, like the kind of visual or optical illusion of the wall, and also the work, because gold operates in that way too, depending on how light hits, it has very different it creates different perspectives and different angles, and with different lighting conditions. And the walls, as I said, were me extruding the Dark Continent world into a much larger canvas. And if you look at those works in person as well, you'll notice the same thing with those works, is that as you move around the image, the figure in the center comes in and out. You know, the world around it actually goes in and out of focus, basically. So you'll have instances where you can only see the figure and it's just surrounded by black, and then you'll walk around and you'll be able to see all of the detail of the flora and the world around it. So it definitely was an extension of that conversation of the visible versus the invisible, and what the eye can see at different angles, and the different refractivity of light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about that bridges off of that is this idea of black being the materia prima, the sort of dark matter that birthed everything,
Mm-hmm.
but is also this cosmic source of light, which is not necessarily how we think of quote unquote black in a 21st century Western or especially context. So I kind of wanted to ask you about that interplay of black as a materia prima, but also the site of void and absence in some ways, if that's part of it. And if it lies on being placed within the context of gold to illuminate that idea of it, black being the cosmic source of light. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, so I look at, you know, black as being the full absorption of light, i.e. it holds light. So we have this very different view of black as being, you know, devoid of light, you know, and if you, I always think about like the blackest black, you know, you can, in our human terms, you have Vanta black that was created that Anish Kapoor has you know, patented or whatever. But in terms of like the more cosmic idea of black, you know, you think about the universe around us. You think about the when you leave our stratosphere, the universe appears to our eye to be black, and it's composed of this matter which we still don't completely understand, which we call dark matter. And then you think further to like ideas of the black hole, and the black hole which literally nothing can escape, including light. I'm very nerdy and I'm into astrophysics and stuff. So these are all like, you know, things that I was thinking about when I created Constellations, especially because it's about this idea of recreating this dense blackness that holds light, and gold is the best material to show that, because gold is its own light source. So, you know, gold works in all kinds of light conditions. It works in very low light conditions, or even, you know, without light, you can still see the glimmers of gold. So, you know, it's having this very big cosmic conversation. And also it goes back to the idea of the origination of gold, how gold even came to be in the universe, and that correlation and that conversation. So yeah, I mean, for me, the dichotomy between black and gold is very symbiotic. It's very much like it can be a micro conversation, but it can also be a very macro cosmic conversation as well.
Love it. And I think the gold in Triumvirate, the gold actually illuminates some of that glossy black so it does create the light that illuminates the black, and it is a nice symbiotic relationship. I love that idea. I think one of the other things that we've been sort of touching on is that the foliage, that black on black, the matte and then the glossy of the black, relates to your Dark Continent series. And so I wondered, you know, with that idea of positionality, where no matter where you are in the room, you're getting kind of an oblique view or a different view. And if it does relate to this sort of conception or a colonial vision or invention of Africa, especially, you know, during that period where it was never quite direct or understood by its own
merit,
sort of manifestations, right? Yeah, on its own, for its own merit. So I wanted to ask what relationship that foliage has to that idea of the Dark Continent.
I mean, when I started that series, it was like kind of, you know, tongue in cheek, taking this whole like, you know, premise of the continent being this kind of unexplored, savage world, right? Which is what like European colonialists painted it as being, which actually, you know, to a large degree still persists today. That narrative still persists today. Probably not so in such an obvious way, but definitely the trickle down of that still is very much within our consciousness. And so for me, I wanted to create a world that almost played on that seemed ominous, that seemed foreboding, that really took this idea and elevated it further and further, you know, enhanced this visual scape of this dark world. And it kind of, you know, different people's reactions it's interesting when I speak to people about it, because some people find it actually very welcoming and they want to immerse themselves in it. Like I want to go there. And some people are very, you know, off put by it, and like it's actually too scary. It's an ominous and dark place, and all the connotations of that, of being dark, and you know, all of the, you know, synonyms of that. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was more just like trying to hyper visualize what it would have maybe felt like from their perspective to look at this world and really think of it as this dark, savage, uncultured, you know, this land. But also at the same time, because my viewpoints on Black are so divergent, I guess, to the common, you know, mainstream ideas of Black. And when I say Black, I'm obviously talking in the most kind of universal terms, like Black as a value, right? It's so divergent to the mainstream in many ways that for me it was actually emboldening and ennobling the Black as well. So it's not just having this conversation of from their perspective, this is maybe how it felt, but also making it undeniably beautiful, undeniably you can't strip away the merit which kind of goes, or the beauty of it, which goes in the face of all the things like I was saying, the synonyms that are attached to Black and all of the different, you know, Western connotations and associations with Blackness and darkness as being maleficent or dark or dangerous or sinful, and all of these different, you know, associations. So I'm always trying to turn things on their head somewhat and kind of reorient people's perspectives of, you know, these stereotypes that exist.
Yeah, and I think those stereotypes persist, as you mentioned, and it took a lot of doing, a lot of the circulation of imagery and ideas from a Western perspective to build up that narrative that exists very much still today. And I think one of the things that you're also doing with this installation, with Constellations, with all your work, is drawing from a much larger canon of African iconography and ideas of writing systems. And that's absolutely something we can see in those works. So maybe you want to comment on some of those influences and how that might kind of shake up, interrogate that narrative.
Sure. I mean, I'm a student of like history and like, you know, I'd say I'm more fascinated by ancient cultures or older cultures. I do think there is an imbued intelligence that we kind of are missing in our societies, in our modern day societies. And there was a certain kind of understanding of the symbiotic nature of our place and in this universe, that it's a partnership and not something that we need to fight against. Or try to control. And so in doing so, you know, you look back to, you know, certain cultures that even, you know, there's still some you know, there still exist cultures today, but they're obviously very few and far between that still kind of have this relationship to the world around them and this reverence and respect. But what you do see when you research, especially even cultures that don't even have or haven't had a you know, a more literal written language, like for example, the Dogon in Mali never had a language in the terms that we think of language, in terms of like the glyphs and the ways of expressing through visuals. But they did have, when they did speak about things, they did reference things, that there's some symbols that seem to be pervasive across cultures and across time. And that is obviously like the idea of time being cyclical. So in that symbol, you'll always see like the circle closing in on itself. And this is true for, you know, Mesoamerican cultures to East and Central African cultures to Aboriginal cultures. I mean, you literally can take a swath of the entire world and see different, you know, antecedents of that understanding of how do you speak about the world around you through these symbols. And so basically I research and I just like extrude and take different symbols from all over the place and all over time and different cultures that I'm studying, and then I obviously spin them in my own, from my own, you know, my own creation in terms of how they're positioned and how they're ordered. So for me it's a very symbiotic experience, because I'm not trying to obviously relay something in the more linear terms that language operates today. I'm trying to speak in a more subliminal way, like literally speaking to our DNA, you know, and the pattern, trying to also reflect the pattern-based universe that we live in through these works, because everything in this universe is pattern-based, everything within our bodies, everything within nature. So to us, it's actually very I think the resonance people have to it is because it's so you know, it's so basically part of our worlds, personally and beyond. So yeah, I mean, for me, the patterns, the symbols that are taken from across cultures, but at the same time are changed to kind of fit my conversation. But they definitely are imbued within us. You know, these are symbols that are universal and have kind of been used throughout societies and throughout cultures and throughout time. So that's, I think, is where the weight comes in with them.
I'm glad that you mentioned that cyclical nature in the DNA, the sort of the spirals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not only do you have those symbols that you're drawing from various different iconographies and things that we, especially in Africa, you've also got, you can look, if you look closely, you can see a very organic nature to some of the things that you've interwoven there. So this is like art and culture and nature, science are sort of all weaving together in this experience, this swirling around us in a way. It's really gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. I think gold is another material that we find that's very global in nature, that has affected human culture and society and art for a long time. So I suppose you've actually said it's mythical, magical, singular material that's been categorically lauded, sought, revered throughout human history. So I guess in its modern interpretation, as you said, it's hyper devalued now. So I think that's another interesting thing that we could talk about. What does your work relate, or how does it return to the status or interpretation of gold as a material or a concept, maybe towards magic?
Right. Well, I mean, it's a shame that in our time, we've really just made gold this this bartering tool and this measurement of very earthly wealth, right? So we have gold bullions, and those are in certain reserves, and each country has their reserves, and it speaks to their kind of wealth should currencies, fall, go to pot, and you have all these different ways of measuring wealth. However, if you look at societies before and their relationship with gold, and it's true, it still persists today in some societies, like in certain places in India, etc. But where there's this understanding that gold is actually has more spiritual value and it has financial value. As in, many civilizations used to bury their dead with gold as a kind of as a way to traverse these two worlds, right, from this world to the next. It was meant to be something to carry on into the next world, to grant them a good journey. And obviously many of those tombs and sarcophagi and all of these have now been excavated, and they now exist in museums, but obviously that was not the intention. So the intention was for this to remain forever with this, this traveling soul. And so you understand in that simple construct what it actually meant to other civilizations before us. It wasn't meant to be something to be bartered with. And also, a lot of civilizations spoke to gold as if it were the sun. Basically, it was akin to the sun on earth. So you have all these allusions to this very cosmic idea and this very otherworldly idea of gold, which I want to, in many ways, imbue my work with. So I know initially when I first started using as much gold as I do, I guess the initial reception was, all of these terms we like to use, like bling, or it must be really expensive, all these like associations that we have, but really it's not about any of that. It's actually about this, I'm trying to create portals, portals to other worlds and other experiences. And that's why when you stand in front of those works, it has a very kind of transcendent, or it offers a very transcendent experience, because the intention is not that. The intention is to actually continue this idea of gold being this portal or this conduit. And then also you can think about the cosmic idea of gold, which I'll try and tell you about very quickly because it can get very long and labored. But basically, gold is created during the death of a star, during a supernova. And when the star is imploding, every different heat signature creates a different element. And one of the last elements to be created is gold. So when you think about gold on this earth, which is obviously very scarce, it basically came from the death of a star. and that was kind of ricocheted into the universe, hit some meteor, the meteor hit the earth during the kind of formation of the earth as we know it. And then we go and like dig in the ground to find this gold. So the very story of gold on this planet is also a mythical one as well. And that's why you find gold in, you know, you go to churches and mosques and the most spiritual and sacred spaces, and there's still that understanding of like what gold means to humanity. And that's why you see these places imbued with gold as well. So I think we've lost the plot, really, to be honest, about what gold actually, you know, means.
Yeah, well, and I tried to get into that a little bit with Good as Gold about what it means to women in Senegal, for example, that it's not just a technically sophisticated piece of jewelry that a man made for her. It's so much more than that. And I love that you're also talking about that spiritual dimension to it, because that is so integral to someone's experience of wearing gold or having it given to them or being part of a community that shares the wealth in order to have something like that. But you also reminded me of thinking about Akan kingship and how, you know, the gold is so integral to his spirituality as a king, as being the closest human being to the gods, to, you know,
to the sun, to the gods,
to the sun. So all of that, you know, and then thinking about the death of the star. So it's that cyclical nature again, where gold is life and the life of a king and the life of a community, while it's also the death of the star and the sort of cyclical nature of the universe. So it's just, I hope that everyone.
I mean, the thing is, the thing is, I'm trying to have really big conversations, and I know that, you know, it's very hard to have these very macrocosmic conversations. But like, essentially, that's especially what these works are about. I mean, I use gold in a lot of my works, and some of them are far more narrative based and based in like, you know, conversations akin to, you know, our society. But this series is really about this macrocosmic conversation and about this kinship between the universe and the black and the dark matter and gold, and these very large conversations that spirituality, all of these things that, you know, I think in the more mundane aspects of our life go over our heads. Yeah,
then we're all a part of that story and that narrative, right? And the way that you're having this macro conversation, it draws all of us into the conversation in a really meaningful way. So yeah, I think we can shift a little bit gears, because I want to ask you a more basic question, which is just, how does it feel being positioned in an African gallery? You know, you're sandwiched by Magdalene Odundo and an Ellen Natsui, which are amazing artists, and so are you. I'm so excited that you are really holding down that entire space with that wall. But you know, just behind that wall are also ancient arts, and you've been talking about that. So I wanted to ask how you felt kind of being positioned in a quote unquote African gallery, which can flatten identities in some ways. So
it can be, you know, it really depends on, which is up to you as the curator, right? It really depends on the sensitivity and the sensibility around the positionality of all of these works and how they all come together and how they all interrelate. And that's really how successful it is, you know? So for me, it's not, I don't ever want to be pigeonholed as just being an African artist. I just want to get the credit of just being an artist, just like anybody else is, right? That I am of African descent is something I'm very proud of. And obviously I have no problem coexisting with, you know, great masters, contemporary and ancient masters, you know. So it's actually just a welcome experience. And I don't think I've ever had a show that, sorry, I don't mind my computer. I don't think I've ever had a show that that has really just brought together, you know, artifacts and artworks across time in this way. I've definitely done shows with other contemporary African artists, but this is a much broader spectrum, and it's done in with such a sensitivity. And honestly, I remember when you told me, or when I saw the images of the Magdalene Odundo works, and I was just absolutely ecstatic, because I'm such a huge fan of her work, and of course Ellen Natsui, a master as well. So I mean, I can't complain. it's a great you know, opportunity, and thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. You know, I wanted to include you a couple of years ago. I wanted to work with you, so I'm so thrilled that we've gotten to do this experiment. And again, I think it really empowers the entire space. So I'm so thrilled to have it. I think one of the other things I guess I wanted to ask about is, again, shifting gears, mobility. So you've been talking about moving about, and I've read Paul Gilroy, TJ Demos. They're thinking about how there's a strength in chronic rootlessness. And so I wanted to kind of softball that to you and see what you think about there being, our 21st century moment is so mobile. It's so moving. And we're also, there's a collapse of time and space. There's characterizing our every movement, our daily experience. So what do you think about that mobility? And I know you move around a lot too, so I want to see how that has fed into your multiplicitous experience or into your work.
100%. I think that, to get back to the roots of it, I went to an international school in England. I grew up in an international school where it was a very small school, but within the school, I think there were 30 nationalities represented. So I've always had this this idea of the world being an open book, right? And people and cultures and everything being accessible and not being mutually exclusive, but actually being all combined and all having their kind of interlinking kind of facets. So that's kind of, I guess, my formative years where I began to understand the world was actually something that I could access and I could travel to, and I could also glean from and borrow things from and learn things from. And there was this idea of I have to exist in this cultural bubble. And since that, I've been a nomad. So I really am a big believer in just moving. And I also don't have this sense of home. And it could be a mixture of many things. I mean, Liberia was never a home. It's an ideological home because obviously my parents left before I was born. And then London is a sense of home. I grew up in South Africa as well. I spent lots of time in the States. So I always was moving around. And now in my older years, like I have the same kind of approach to life as well. It's like I have no problem upping and leaving and just starting somewhere new and just seeing what happens. And if I don't like it, I don't like it. And exactly. And if I like it, then I'll stay. So I've never had this fear of mobility or this sense that it's not something within my grasp. So yeah, I just like to keep moving, and I really sincerely feel like there's a very nomadic kind of energy about the way that I migrate to places. On top of that, I think the only thing that would ever ground me or root me in a place for a long time, which did in New York for a while, was having a physical space to work from and like having a studio and having the obligation. So this year, having let go of my studio actually grants a great opportunity just to kind of make a studio wherever I am, and that's what I'm kind of looking forward to for the next few years, actually.
Yeah, and I had the great pleasure of visiting that studio before it was gone. It was really a beautiful space. I think in some ways you're revisiting this idea of positionality and mobility even within the gallery space, for example. So, if you're looking at Triumvirate, you're moving yourself around. It reminds me, you can't see a masquerade from one perspective. You have to move yourself, and it broadens your experience. It broadens your positionality. So I can see that in your work too, that you are almost asking or even suggesting to people that they move to different positions to get a different experience. Yeah. And that we can think of on a macro scale as well, that we should move more in our own worlds, between worlds. And in those ways, you can illuminate a very different experience, and you can get maybe an idea of how other people experience the world, and then we can all just sort of maybe understand each other.
I think that's an imperative, if ever there were one right now, isn't there? That we actually really have to be far more open and sensitive to, quote unquote differences between people, or understanding, things outside of our own purview, because and educating yourself about that, and also it's imperative right now, and we're seeing all the ramifications of not doing that. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I said, the world to me has always been like an oyster. You can do what you want, you can go where you want, you can experience what you want. And this idea of borders, like they exist, but they shouldn't impede your inquisitiveness and your hunger and your drive to kind of understand how multiplicities of people live, so yeah, I mean, it's very important to be able to shift perspectives and keep moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that comes out in your work as well. So I think this also then touches on some of the other things we could talk about, which is these seismic changes that we're experiencing, this moment where, our lives have been thrown into very different worlds. I mean, very different experiences, and we're sort of thrown together, but also apart and separate. So I think I wanted to see how, talk about why art is necessary in this moment, and why you think it is. I have my own ideas, but I'd rather hear from you, of course.
I mean, I can't tell you I've given that much thought about why it's important right now. I think art is always important, and especially in times of crisis or like of rising tension, as like a valve, if you will, like a perspective or a release to try and explain. I mean, artists, for me, I've always said that artists reveal the things that are hidden. They reveal the underbelly of society, and they reveal the hidden, like if you talk about dimensionals, like dimensional world, like the different dimensions that we with our five senses can't grasp or can't see. So in that way, art is and will always be, super important in society, because it is the artist's job to be sincere, to be true, and to be a reflection of the times. I think Nina Simone said that perfectly once. She has an artist's job is to reflect the times. So whatever people are creating right now across all disciplines there's no way that it's not going to be have it imbued in it, this current climate we're in, and the tensions that are existing even beyond COVID. I mean, there's so many tensions throughout the world right now, and it's kind of impossible to not address those things because we're part of this world, and we're always reflecting the world around us. So in that way, I mean, art is and will always be a necessity for us as artists to process the world, and then for people that are viewing it to maybe shift perspectives, like we were talking about earlier, or offer a different kind of different perspectives on how you can look at a situation.
Yeah, and it's a source of comfort as well, and solace in some ways. But I like to think of it also as, you don't see the culture that you're coming from necessarily. You don't see the water that you're swimming in at all times, right? So an artist comes along and sees things in a different way, I feel like. And I take that term very broadly, but I think that they allow us, they render some of those things that we dismiss much more visible, and make things more imperative to us, and oh, I got my cat, hold on. He wants
what a cutie.
Okay. Yes, this is Miyagi. So I think he's very insistent when he wants to be up here. So I guess, and again, that idea of time collapsing, and that we're all sort of close together and rubbing up on one another while also being so apart. And I think our dialogue has become that much more imperative, expedient, et cetera. And I wonder if those things, what are the negative sides of those things, and how that might have affected art or artists, your own practice.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that when this whole thing happened or started to happen, I was in New York, and obviously we all know how it happened in New York in March and April. And the number one question I kept getting from people I was speaking to is, what are you creating? What are you creating? Like, what is your response to this? As if there's this like immediate sense that I need to distill the world through making art. And I think that there's been this kind of pressure, especially from, I guess, people that exist in the quote unquote art market to for this year to be this year of hyper productivity, because there's so much going on. So how could you not have something to say immediately? And I think that is a negative side effect, like that consistent wheel that needs to be fed all the time with new, rather than people just feeling and experiencing and taking stock. Because this is what this year has been about, really. At the end of the day, this kind of unanimous pause is for us to take stock and for us to reflect whether these fast-paced, lives we're living, what's the merit in them? What are we really gaining? Are we gaining, or are we losing in the process? So I think that is one of the negative side effects of this, is like this need, this lack of understanding that there is a time to produce and there's a time to stop and pause, and and speaking to other artists as well about that, because I do think there's this kind of this guilt that goes along with not producing all the time, which is kind of backwards when you think about it, because you think about the great masters of times before, And there was never this need to produce every year, like consistently produce. It was like, there's an understanding, it's like breathing in and out, you know, and you need to take time. So this year, in that way, the good side of that is I've done that. At least I've taken that time to really pause and reflect and think about what would come next, what I need to say now in response to the climate. Other than that, I mean, there's so many negatives to this current time, but I think that the silver lining has to be that we collectively and individually are able to, you know, really reassess where we're going, like where we are all going, you know, and how we are treating the world around us and how we are treating each other. And is this actually sustainable? Is the way we're living right now sustainable? And obviously I argue it's not, but you know, we'll see whether it actually has. There's no way it's not going to have an effect. However, we'll see whether the effect, the kind of fallout of this time is actually going to, you know, over time create positive changes in, you know, in all of our lives, you know, as nations and also as individuals. But yeah, I mean, it's still an unfolding event as we're going. I mean, America's about to go into the elections now, right? And I mean, that's a whole nother moment that is going to have the world bracing. Not just Americans, the entire world's going to be bracing for what's going to happen. So I mean, it's a tense time, and I just hope that out of it will be smarter, more intelligent, more sensitive, more understanding, and more aware after all this kind of comes to some kind of, you know, head.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience where I realized that, you know, in this moment where we all have been hyper connected and hyper productive, how can we step back and sort of see some of that and just breathe in and out and take the time to emotionally respond to things and to experience one another and to just get back some of that time that we don't realize we're losing in that hyper consumerist productive state that we tend to find ourselves in all the time. So I've certainly had a different kind of year as well. And the step back is like a deep breath. And I think in some ways we all need to be taking those breaths. But I imagine for many, it's difficult to breathe when you don't know how you're going to afford your rent. And I mean, there's a lot
100%.
of problems. So
I mean, yeah, I mean, I can't speak for what's going on in the UK too much, but I know what's going on in the US, and it's tragic, and it's really what happens when you have lack of leadership and lack of foresight and lack of planning for the inevitable that came. So I mean, again, like I said, I hope that from the situation, through all the suffering that I know is happening, I really hope that we as a society learn how to not let this repeat again, not let this happen again. And to also uphold and help each other that need it right now.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's the sea change is coming, that there's this.
You feel it, right? I mean, you feel people's energies are changing, and people's like sense of what's important, and I guess like the what's important in life is definitely coming to the fore for many people, and so hopefully, you know, fingers crossed, next couple of years are going to be a little lighter as well. In general, the energy should probably be a little lighter for the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, I've been really interested in restitutions of African cultural heritage lately, and this is not a new conversation. So I think like the protests, the Black Lives Matter, the ideas of systemic racism, those are not new conversations. But
they're just coming to the public forum in a larger way now. But they've been existing for the longest time. Yeah,
exactly. And so now that they're more visible and people are going, oh yeah, this is still a problem, isn't it? I think COVID laid that bare in a lot of ways. And so now I feel like it is going to change. Maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm too hopeful, but I think that it feels different. I think
the genie's out the bag now. It's like before it was a problem that was specific to, you know, a certain group of people, and so therefore people outside of that couldn't really understand it, and there was all this like divisiveness going on. But now it's like this year is the year of revelation, right? It's like everything has been brought to the public in the most unfiltered way, where it can no longer be denied what's going on. And that is, for all the negatives associated with that and all the tragedies that have happened, the silver lining of that is positive, because now people are rallying behind issues that maybe not even necessarily affect them personally, but they understand it's a human rights issue, or it's it's all of these things combined. It's and it's trying to rectify mistakes that happened in the past. We're really having a reckoning this year of like all the mistakes of the past, like now showing themselves in the current climate as they are still persisting, but it's based upon these seeds of the past, and it's all come to this climax, and now it has to be addressed. So yeah, I mean that's another silver lining of this year, I think, as well.
Completely agree. I would love to talk with you more and more about that. We are getting a lot of questions, so I did want to kind of turn it over to some of our audience members to let them ask these questions. So I will just, and I mean, I wanted to also ask you about some of your new work and where you're headed next. But yeah. Let's see if that comes out in some of the questions. Let's see. So from Michaela Wuna, who's a friend and someone I wanted to make sure I put you two in conversation, wants to know if you could speak about the progression of your own spiritual journey and parallel research process into the African mythical, Dogon, Kemetic, and more. So the conversation of blacklisting your work from a primordial and cosmic sense anchored in our ancient traditions is so rich and crucial. And I would love to hear about your own journey into this world personally, spiritually, and academically that has now shaped your work.
That's a great question. And, I would say it's very much parallel. I think I started to really, I don't know if you should call it spirituality, because honestly, it has so many, connotations now, but I think I started my journey into understanding, beyond the religious kind of ramifications, that there are many energies and forces at play. And that probably started around, early in my life, I think it became very strong around 2013, 2014. And that's when, my spiritual practice got very much more like developed, and I'd meditate every day, and I would, do tarot. I did all kinds of things. And it was interesting because I think that because your spiritual eye opens up, and your third eye, or your connection to something larger opens up, you also become a receiver. And I was looking at a lot of the, people that I've studied that I admire, and you think about like Nikola Tesla and Da Vinci, and the people that have written histories that are very clear written about them, right? That's why I'm referencing them. But they all spoke about how to glean the information that they were able to deliver to the world. They basically would enter into these like meditative states. And they all spoke about it, and they called it different things, but really it was this idea that they were not these huge carriers of knowledge per se, that they were just receivers of knowledge, and they would learn how to distill that knowledge and then give it to the world. And they got this knowledge through this kind of connection they had through meditation and these different meditative practices. And I remember learning about that and thinking that's actually a very interesting kind of method to basically create. So that's basically how I started to create. I started to see things like when I'm meditating, or see things and it all makes sense. And it's still true to this day. I mean, every morning it's like I start to make greater sense of what's coming next, so I would definitely say it's very symbiotic, very hand in hand, that my spiritual journey, and then how that kind of manifested through my work. And also, obviously, I'm a constant student, and I always want to, learn new things. So akin to that is a huge research part to my leg to my work as well, that I don't think we really delved into too much, but that research took me down that road to study these cultures and study these modes of communication, and also see like the through lines across time and cultures that have kind of spoken about or tried to, depict their place in the universe. So it's all very much hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that actually one of our other questions was specifically about Dogon motifs, and kind of how you engage with those ideas of androgyny, for example, sacrifice, resurrection, celestial objects. So I don't know if you want to comment any more on that, because it relates to what you were already speaking about. I
was more interested in the, obviously I'm aware of the objects, but I was more interested in this the narratives that and the verbal, I guess the stories that were passed down verbally, and the idea that these cultures that were seen as being you know, backwards in many ways, or primitive would be the word that people like to use, and I can speak on the etymology of primitive too. But yeah, that how they actually had advanced understanding of things that, you know, to this day astrophysicists and all of these things are just discovering. Like, for example, that Dogon have spoken about the star Sirius for eons, and we've only just proved Sirius existed in the last, I don't know, 50, 60 years. So I mean, proved. So, you know, it's like I was more interested in their foreknowledge, or their ability to see or grasp, or however they were doing it, information that we, with all of our technology, are only beginning to understand and grasp now. And how, honestly, like I said before, I think that a lot of these ancient or older cultures that we have relegated to being primitive or indigenous, all of these other words that are used to kind of to lower their kind of their merit, are actually in many ways far more advanced in terms of their understanding of the world around them. I hope that answered the question, kind of.
Yeah, no, but I think that's the kind of knowledge that needs to be highlighted and valued. And I think that we've had this, not only an ocular centric idea, but very much a written history as being what is concrete, what is standing in as history with a capital H. And there's so many other ways of being and making history, you know, almost emoting it in some ways. Like, there's different ways of interpreting the world and tracking history that should be paid attention to. Just because it's a little bit different from, you know, other perspective doesn't make it any less valid. I mean, certainly. So I like that there's that intersection with that question and what you're doing. So Terry White has a quick one, I think. She purchased your book, Summer Born to Endless Night, and says it's beautiful. Question is twofold. Well, what inspired you to create the book? And second, are there any autographed copies available?
So the book it was more of an offshoot of the exhibition and autograph. So it was always like hand in hand with the exhibition, the book was going to come, because it was the first time that all of those works, in terms of the Dark Continent series, which was the central kind of body of work in that show, it was the first time they were all brought together. It was also, I also extended that series pretty significantly during that time as well. So from the regular 24 works to 48 works, and then obviously made larger variations of the works too. So that book was always meant to kind of be a bookend to that series and really kind of consolidate that body of work. We were lucky and unlucky with the timing of that book, because obviously it was delayed a whole year after the first run, and then because of that we were able to include installation images and make it actually a richer text. So yeah, that was always part of the kind of understanding when I did the exhibition, was that book, that monograph, would be coming out with it. And autograph copies, I don't think there are any autograph copies, sorry.
There's actually another question by Eddie Hewitt that asks about the same, the book and the show at Autograph. So they want to know about you use multiple different materials, right? So you do performance as well. So they're asking about your performance-based pieces merging self-portrait photos and painted backgrounds. So do you see this as a contrast, i.e. the mystical next to the exposed? Come on that.
Sorry, what was the last part? As the mythical?
The mystical next to the exposed is how they framed it.
Okay.
So I think.
I mean, I need you to repeat that question one more time. I'm trying to get to the crux of what they were asking.
So your big mystical symbol-based pieces were alongside your more performance-based pieces, merging self-portrait photos.
Okay,
and
I get you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is that a contrast?
Yeah, so I've always done that. I've always, I create abstract works and I create figurative works, and they always, they're coming from the same root in terms of the conversations. So to me, it's very much a symbiotic thing to have them together. It's like not to separate them. These are the abstract works, these are the figurative works. If you look at the process and the kind of even the finished works, I mean, there's a lot of cross-pollination. And they do riff off each other, just like we did with the North Carolina show, where there's no Dark Continent works, but the whole foliage enters for constellations. And definitely with the autograph show, there was this trying to bridge different bodies of works together to stream them together, basically, with the installation. So for me, it's very, they exist together. Dark continent constellations, all these different bodies of work can be obviously like mutually exclusive, but they also have a lot of through line with them, with the process and also the narrative or the concept of the works.
So there's another question that kind of bridges that as well, which is thinking about your process and your materiality. So one of our questions was how you mold the gold into all the different patterns. So basically you build layers up when you're making something like the constellations pieces. So maybe you could talk about your process of building that up.
Sure, without giving any away trade secrets.
Right.
I mean, the base of the work, when you traditionally gild, water gild, this is like ancient gilding, obviously, you use a product called bowl. So basically, beneath the gold, traditionally you have 3 different colors which affect the hue of the gold because the gold is so thin. So whatever you put the gold on will have, whatever is beneath it will have some kind of, you know, color conversation. And the 3 colors are black, yellow, and a red oxide color. And this most of what you'll see if you look at icons or you go to churches and things like that, you'll see the red oxide color is what you'll see. And if you look closely, you'll see, like, through the gold, you'll see the red. And so yes, basically I've created my own technique to be able to build up using the same color spectrums that are used traditionally, build up the canvases and different mediums, and then I gild on top of it. So all of the formation of the shapes and the symbols happens before any of the gold is placed on top. And it's very different, honestly, when you just have the base medium material, you know, even with all of those grooves and those kind of like organic forms and structures. Once you put the gold in it, it transforms, because like I said, gold is this kind of refractor of light. So it gets all these different grooves and hits everything in a very different way than a matte color does. And it really, you know, it changes, it transforms the work and makes it a whole nother, it makes every symbol very different from what it was when it was first kind of originated and created.
Agreed. Well, and a similar question then from Danielle is what motivates you to get started on a piece, and how long does it take to create one of those paintings? I think a lot of people probably want to know that. And then from where do you draw your energy to create?
I'm going to tell you seriously, I think there are other artists that said this too. Like, you spend a lot of time preparing to work, and then when it actually happens, it's like this big push, like it's like a very quick. So I would say I spend a long time thinking about work and researching about work and trying to motivate myself to work before I actually start the actual physical work. And the physical work can happen if you look at the kind of the time frames pretty quickly, you know, because obviously it's fully conceived by that point, and it's just like, now it's just about producing it, creating it. And in terms of the production time for constellations, it's a long production time. It takes months. It takes about you know, at a leisurely pace, like 3 to 6 months. If you're working very fast, you can maybe do it in 2 to 3 months, but they take a long time also because there's a long drying period. It's like a very kind of step-by-step process that's required. And gilding is a very slow process too.
Yeah. Another question that we had, I think we have just a little bit more time, is what influences the patterns and symbols that appear in the works? Do they come together as you flow with the material, or do you deliberately place the symbol in certain areas of the canvas? So again, it's about process and sort of planning.
Yeah. It's deliberate. So every work, especially with like constellations, which are very dense works and very kind of you know, orchestrated works, the whole canvas is planned before I begin. So and because each one is like if you look at the works, and it's interesting actually, we should have touched on this with this, is that Constellations 1 was the first work I made, and if you look at the symbols and the depth of like how sculptural it is, it's very flat. And it was always conceived that each consecutive work would become more dense and also have a higher relief. So you have number 1, 4, and 9. So 4 is like the midway, and 9's it's getting very high. The the canvas and the relief on the canvas is very high. This is number one. You can see that the and it's pretty low. I don't know if you can see because you can't see it from the side, but it's very close to the canvas. So each one draws more and more and more from the canvas, and they also borrow symbols from each other, and they overlap in many ways. So it's all very orchestrated, because I want it to be a visually, like a mathematical almost conversation as each one consecutively builds.
And then here's a few other of those symbols that people have been asking about, and also other details of that gorgeous gold.
So where the symbols come from, like we were saying before, like I literally I study all kinds of different cultures, different, you know, I look at textiles, I look at, you know, like I said, Aboriginal dream paintings. I mean, I look at a lot of different things, and then kind of, you know, like hoard images and like, you know, adapt things, and then start to kind of compose and place them as I think it, you know, it's a very, in terms of the compositions, it's still a very organic experience. It's an organic process. I'm not trying to say anything. It's really just what feels right when I'm kind of putting everything together.
Let's see, there is one more by, I believe this is a student of mine, so I'm glad that she asked a question. Let's see, in your dark continent works, how do you create the gold designs on the body? Is it more inspirational in the moment, or do you usually have ideas beforehand? And is there a symbolic meaning behind the hair, facial features, or the back at times?
Yeah, basically, can you hear me properly? Sorry, I think my headphones are going off. Basically, the body, I basically plan everything in advance. So like I said, I'll research, I'll look at, you know, different, you know, different tribal cultures and different ways they use the body as a canvas, and how they mark the body. And I'll borrow things from that, and it's done in camera, as in the body is painted onto and then photographed. So so yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that was considered before. It's not something that just happens. In terms of the actual markings on the body, sure, at some point it will just become far more kind of intuitive and organic and not like replicating anything. And then it's just about, you know, photographing the body. When I do these type of shoots, I'll shoot like 1,000 to 2,000 pictures in different, you know, positions and different angles and different everything, like body formations, and so it just gives me a large spectrum of material to work with when it comes to the editing process.
Absolutely. So I think I'm going to ask you one more question, and that is really about what's next. What is some of the new work? Because I think you're moving into yet another medium, and I wanted to see if you had anything you could share with us about that.
Sure. So, you know, I'm moving, and I'm
of
moving
course you are.
Yeah. So I'm setting up shop for the next couple of years in Italy, and I'm going to be working far more with ceramics. I'm going to continue making paintings and doing figurative and abstract works, but I'm definitely, you know, my work is very sculptural, but I really want to work with actual, like, you know, sculpture now. So yeah, I'm getting into ceramics, and I still also always build structures, like architectural structures and stuff. That's going to be a continual conversation as well. But definitely like to push different mediums, because they allow you to express different ideas. And right now, my focus has been very much on playing with ceramics and sculptural work. So that's where I'm headed.
That's so great. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. And I think that's a really compelling thing about a lot of some of my favorite artists these days, is that they're pushing those envelopes of being confined or fixed into a certain kind of production. So you're a painter, stay in your lane, be a painter. You know, I think some of the most compelling, amazing artists out there right now are really saying, no, you can draw from all these different kinds of mediums and materials to create a much more dynamic experience, which is actually closer to what most of our experiences are like in general.
Exactly. I've always rebelled against that since I was very young. I've rebelled against that idea. You are a photographer, that's all you do. And I think that it behooves artists to actually, you know, get out of their comfort zone and try different things. And also, I've always believe that vision transcends medium. So if the story or whatever it is that you have to say requires you to say it in a certain way, then why would you not do that? You know, so definitely try different things.
Why box yourself in or let anybody else do
exactly. There's no one else doing it but you. So I mean, Yeah, definitely as much flexibility as possible.
Thank you so much for this
Thank you very much,
conversation. Yes,
Amanda. It's been a
really appreciate
pleasure.
it. Yeah, always. I hope to see you even virtually again soon.
I'm
Take
sure we
care.
will. We have another few months before the show ends, so.
Yes.